Next, we have a special Q&A segment composed of our faculty members from El Camino College. The business division at El Camino is very enthusiastic about serving and equipping students and their entrepreneurial journey like Thomas. So for this reason, today's session has been greatly anticipated. Each of our faculty members has a very specific area of specialization, having worked in industry for many years. So in addition to sharing their skills in the classroom, we're going to share them individually, make sure that you get an idea and a little more information about who they are. But first, I want to introduce you to today's panel moderator. Our panel moderator is Professor Melissa Somdesurf. Professor Somdesurf teaches business management courses and developed the curriculum for the new entrepreneurial studies program at El Camino College. So I am now going to pass the torch over to Melissa, Professor Melissa, and she's going to take it from there. Thank you. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tiana. That was a great first session. And now while we have our instructors switching their cameras on, I'd like to introduce each of them. It is my honor to introduce 4 faculty members from the business division. Each owns or has owned a small business. Starting first with Professor John Yerserian, who is a licensed real estate agent in the South Bay. He owns an e-commerce business as well with his brother. It's a partnership called the Deal Team. The Deal Team was started out of a garage and earned very little that first year. But after 10 years, their venture is thriving now, making several $1 million a year in gross revenue. Welcome, Professor Yerserian. Second is Professor Sydney Porter, who teaches accounting and brings audit, tax, and government accounting experience to the table. He knows a lot about the challenges of acquiring a small practice on his own. He was the director of finance for the city of Inglewood and also worked for the Metro. Now you can find Professor Porter teaching beginning and intermediate accounting courses as well as QuickBooks. Welcome to Professor Porter. Professor V. Pham is a lawyer and teaches business law. She previously worked for the U.S. Small Business Administration at the Small Business Development Center located at California State University, Fullerton. She blends her interest in law and business and advises clients on legal issues related to their small business. And welcome to Professor Pham. And our 4th panelist is Professor Yoon Chow. After working for Morgan Stanley and Citigroup, he applied his investment management experience to starting and exiting a few businesses. As an entrepreneur, he formed the first legal music download website in Asia and also started a wealth management company. He holds a BA in economics and international relations from USC and an MBA from Columbia University. Welcome to all 4 panelists this afternoon. And the audience, I want to remind you that you are welcome to use the chat box to submit your questions. So we're going to start with a question to each of you. Let's hear about your business startup experience. Highlight your product or your service, who your customers are. Tell us a little bit about your businesses that you've started. So let's start with Professor Yerserian. Give us a little overview.
Hi, so welcome everybody. So my background was in real estate, and about 10 years ago, my brother and I came up with this idea to enter the e-commerce business because we saw an opportunity expanding in, you guys seen Amazon, Groupon, all those things. So we got into e-commerce as a small garage business, as a side gig. We never knew where it's going to take us, but we have developed it. And basically we supply, it was a B2B business in the beginning, business to business. Now we also do a little bit of retail. So you'll see a lot of our products on not only Amazon but Groupon, some television shows. We have a episode on HSN and East Coast, where a lot of the news channels carry us when they have product segments. So, and I'll talk about more later. Thank you.
Great, thank you. How about Professor Pham?
Hi, everybody. I own my own small business. I own my own law practice. Started off by working for other people. Realized I didn't really quite care for working for other people. And so I decided to just launch my own business.
Looks like her screen froze for a minute there, so we'll come back to her. How about Professor Porter?
Hello, everyone. I am happy to be here and glad to see you all here. I started off my entrepreneurial business when I left a big CPA firm and decided that I wanted to do something different. And I decided that I wanted to start my own accounting business. So it's quite a different thing to work with a lot of small businesses and individuals, but it was quite an exciting experience. So, you know, it's a great thing to do.
Great, thank you. And Professor Chow? You're muted. There
Hi,
you go.
everybody. I'm so glad you guys can join. I will talk about two of the businesses that I started, and I've exited both already, so I no longer own those businesses. One was, as Professor Sumdersurf said, it was a music download site, and I've always been interested in technology, felt that artists weren't being listened to, so basically created a site and basically a platform that artists can put in their music, listeners can listen, and also they can get labels and sponsors to follow them as well. So it's discovery and follow. And the other business that I started was a investment management business. And this was really different. This was basically getting institutional investors, investment firms to invest in a fund that my partners and I operated. And those were both very different businesses, but things that I have a passion for.
Thank you. Let's go back to Dr. Pham. You froze there for a minute, so let's go back to you so you can finish your thoughts.
I don't know where I cut off, but I was saying that I started off my own law firm after working for other people, learned what I didn't like specifically. And so I just really knew that what I wanted to do was just start off on my own. So, but I got to say that that experience of training with other people and working with other people was really sort of invaluable to starting up my own business. So now I can control my own schedule again. So for a control freak like me, it works out pretty well.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to another question. I'd like you to talk about the idea of being your own boss. Professor Pham mentioned that as well. And, you know, it sounds really enticing to many students for a good reason. You're in control of your future and your money, and you set your own schedule, like she said. So I want to ask Professor Porter, was your experience as rewarding as you had thought it would be?
Thanks. Actually, it was. I really wanted to do something on my own, and kind of like you mentioned, I wanted to be my own boss and make my own schedule. And I thought that those were great things, but what I found was that there was a lot more to it, and I had a lot more to do. So be my own boss meant I was responsible for making sure that I did everything, and making my own schedule really wasn't what I thought it would be. It was more make my own schedule to do all the work that I had taken on. So my own schedule wasn't, hey, I could sleep until noon. But it turned out to be very rewarding because everything that I did, everything that I achieved was through my own hard work. So it was always very satisfying to see things come to fruition.
Okay, who else wants to jump in on that one?
I think the idea of being your own boss, I mean, earlier, when the keynote speaker was talking about, there's a lot of cool thought, like he talked about entrepreneurs, with a lot of money, and it kind of looks really enticing. But I think being your own boss has a lot of humility that is involved with it as well. Listening to people's advice. You have your convictions, right? You believe in what you're doing. You believe in your mission and your business. But at the same time, you have to, you have the opportunity to listen to other people, get good advice, and also have that openness, right? Sometimes we think entrepreneurs are just kind of bullheaded and they just go only the direction they think, and it's them against the world. It's very much not like that. It's about bringing your network together. It's about bringing ideas, the best ideas, and letting that kind of float up so that you can do what's best for the business, not just what you're thinking is the best thing, but taking sound advice as well. So to me, it was a certain amount of humility being my own boss.
Great point. All right, let's talk a little bit about ownership structure. When you start a business, it's your choice. And some of you opted for a sole proprietorship. Others of you selected a partnership. Companies can also incorporate or select an LLC. The decision to work with a partner or by yourself, it's an important one. So I want to ask Professor Chow, how did you decide on the legal structure for your businesses that you started?
Yeah, that's a good question. And part of that was really predicated on the business itself that I wanted to structure and kind of my goals looking forward. So even before I started to structure my business, whether it's a partnership or a corporation or sole proprietorship, I kind of looked at the business model I had at the time and also where I would like to be in the future. Taking a step back, one of the things I had was I had business partners or co-founders in each of the startups that I founded. So with that already being said, it's like I couldn't really choose sole proprietorship as a structure because there was more than one of us. But just taking a step back, I think one of the bigger decisions was who's your partner. I'll have to be honest. I mean, I wasn't always the best at choosing co-founders. I chose like a BFF, like my best friend, and we always get along, and we've got along since we were like, trainees and stuff like that. It's going to be great, right? We're just going to have a great time. That was probably one of the worst decisions ever. Okay. Because we had no skills that complemented each other. We had the same set of skills. He had a different goals in mind. So our goals weren't even aligned, right? So our capabilities weren't aligned. Our goals weren't aligned, and we didn't have a very good equitable structure. Okay. And then that goes into the decisions I've made in terms of how to structure the business. So because I had a partner and co-founder in my businesses, I opted for setting up a corporation because the goals in mind were that I would probably have to bring in new investors in, and that would be a lot easier to do that by issuing new shares rather than kind of creating another partner or bringing in another partner. That was one thing. Another thing too is that some of the businesses that I had were built to sell. And I'll talk about exits a little bit later if I have the opportunity. But we knew that business may be acquired at some point in the future. And again, it's much easier to do that with a corporation than it is with a partnership, we felt. So in both cases, it was really looking at what goals we had for the business and kind of that next steps in terms of raising money, funds for the business, bringing in new investors, and eventually, the type of exit or exit horizon that we had. And that basically dictated that the corporation or the corporate structure was best for us. So it's all predicated on the goals and the vision that you have for the company.
Okay.
For the business.
Excellent. Good to know. What about Professor Usurian? You also had a partnership, but yours formed in a little bit different way.
Yeah, so I basically didn't have an option. It's a family member, so I'm working with my brother here, and so when you have family working together, you have a little bit of a comfort zone, and you also have a little bit of tension because a lot of times it's like any other business, you might not disagree with your partner. So same thing happens with family, but then you have to sit at the dinner table together at some point again. So you try to keep like the business aspects and emotions out of your personal relationships, like Professor Chow was saying, like when you have a BFF and things don't work out, you still want to try to keep that friendship by keeping that business decision out. So we've learned how to do that. It was challenging. Some days would be working in the same warehouse, and we'd go 2 or 3 days not saying anything to each other, but you'd have to talk again about business, and then and when we get home, it's a different story. But it happens, so you have to pick your partners carefully. And I think you have to, if you guys have the same skills, like what Professor Chow mentioned, it's probably not the best thing to look for. You got to find something that you're weak in and select that person as your partner. So if you're weak in marketing, go find a partner that knows marketing, social media, right? Or accounting. If you're weak at accounting, go find somebody that's better in accounting. So I think it's a really important decision to start off. It can make or break a business. Thank you.
Okay, great. Professor Pham, can you explain a little bit more about the legal considerations that entrepreneurs face when making this decision, more than just their circle of professional connections? What should they be thinking about when deciding LLC, partnership, corporation, and so forth?
Sure. So one of the things that Professor Chow mentioned was, being a little bit forward thinking and thinking about where your business is going to go or where you want it to go. Usually for a lot of startups, they're sort of struggling with raising money and trying to minimize expenses. So, setting up a formal business entity costs money. Going to an attorney costs money. So not all entrepreneurs, have the luxury of getting everything formalized at the very start. What I've seen in my experience is that people go into business with their BFFs and they just sort of haphazardly sort of throw their business together thinking that they get along great. That might be great for a roommate to have in a roommate, but you can ignore your roommate and you'll be fine. But you can't really do that in a business. So the way I phrase it is, you're going into a marriage with somebody on a business level, right? So when you're thinking about it, again, being forward thinking about it, if you're thinking about going into business with other people, you want to sort of minimize expenses. You probably want to start off with a partnership. That's probably the most inexpensive route to start off with. But the problem is that, again, you're entering into hopefully what will be a long-term relationship, and each of the partners needs to establish what the expectations are for the business, what the respective roles will be. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because, and what people don't think about is that they need a prenup for their business, right? It's a prenuptial agreement for their business. They've got to lay out their partnership agreement. You want to really lay out who's got the roles and responsibilities. You want to lay out that each of the partners has access to the books, because that becomes an issue later on. And so you really want to lay out, again, what's going to happen under different circumstances. I'm an attorney. I always see the worst side of things. And so what I try to do with my business owners, with my clients, is sort of anticipate some of these issues, have them talk about it in advance so that there are no surprises if and when these issues come up. So whether you're doing a partnership, whether you've got the money to formalize your business with an LLC, with a corporation, again, no matter what the entity is, you want to talk with your other business owners, with your other shareholders, your other business partners, to really lay out the groundwork, have a solid foundation as to, what everybody's role will be, and what the expectations will be. Especially, with a lot of college students, people want to go into business with their friends, which is great. Usually you've got one person bringing in the money, the other person says they'll bring in the labor, the sweat equity. But what happens when that relationship gets so lopsided that, you've got one person doing all the work and the other person is still sharing in all the revenue? Those resentments start to build up. So one of my roles is to make sure, again, you anticipate all those things, you lay everything out in the agreement so that everybody's clear as to what the expectations will be.
Thank you. That's an excellent explanation of how to go about doing that. As your business develops, owners need support, and sometimes that's accounting support. Sometimes it's legal advice, like Dr. Pham was talking about. Sometimes it's just administrative support, and Thomas Slaughter showed us a few examples of tools he uses. It's sometimes difficult to know when it's time to turn for help and who to ask. So I'm wondering about asking Professor Porter, When does a business need an accountant or even just to hire a bookkeeper? When would the owner know it's time to get that support?
That's a great question. And, even Thomas Slaughter today talked about it, the importance of having accounting from the very beginning. And I know that most people out there are not really strong at accounting and, maybe they're uncomfortable doing it. So if you don't have the accounting knowledge or background, and you don't know how to use things like QuickBooks or other accounting software, I always recommend that you get some accounting help in the beginning. And the reason why I recommend that, not only for record keeping, or just plain bookkeeping to know how well your business is doing, but also to avoid very costly mistakes. And I'll give you a couple of examples of some costly mistakes. Both, I was fortunate where my strength was in accounting, where I was able to do my own accounting, but I've had a lot of clients where they've made some very costly mistakes in the very beginning. And unfortunately, when you wait a long time to go see an accountant, whatever you did can't be undone. So if you spent money on things that there is no deduction for them, or that you in some ways made a lot of mistakes, well, as an accountant, I can only tell you that you made those mistakes and have to report them the way that they legally must be reported, but I can't undo them. So I've seen one of my clients especially who went in on LegalZoom, so they didn't have any legal advice, and they set themselves up as a certain type of corporation and had no idea what it was, and then started doing their business activities. And by the end of all of that, they came to me. And when they came to me, I just told them, I can't undo what you've done. And it was a great tax liability they had because a lot of their expenses were not deductible for the purposes they wanted. And the client was very upset because they thought they had done everything right. And then what they didn't know they needed to know. So I always recommend that you get some advice. I had to get legal advice for myself because I went into a business and I was going to buy a business as well. And I can't tell you how important it was, but get it early if you can, because you won't regret it.
Great, thank you. What about Professor Usurian? So I know you had a partnership you started with and it's grown. Where along the road did you decide to get help?
So yeah, I'm gonna touch on that. I wanted to say a little thing about the accounting part Professor Porter mentioned. I was laughing because it's a little bit funny for us because the first couple of years as we were growing in the business, we didn't really use accounting software. So when we finally realized we needed an accountant, we can't do it ourselves. We took all our receipts and went to the accountant. We're like, poop, here it is. We plopped open everything. The accountant looked at us. He goes, you know what? He goes, I'm going to have to charge you double what it costs because I'm going to have to go through and sort all this disorganization out. So, and it wasn't a joke. It costs you more money to organize stuff than had we done it the right way from the beginning. So then we start using, the accountant showed us how to use QuickBooks, trained us a little bit, and our accounting costs are like half of what it was in the beginning. But so as far as like the question was going about how to start, when to know when to hire people, is when we start realizing that we were stretching thin our own time. It's like you're running around doing everything and you're like, you know what, we need to get help. It's time for help. So our first kind of hires were actually like accountant to help us, bookkeeper, to get our records together. And then as far as what we do is a lot of warehouse work. So we decided at some point, we can't package and do all the stuff. It just, the orders are just getting way too many than we can handle as a 2-person partnership. So we brought on some part-time help. So we start with part-time help. For us, fortunately, there was a high school next door. And so all the high school kids would just walk by and we just put a sign out. Anybody want to help like 2 or 3 days a week, like maybe 2 hours here and there. And they just came over after school and they would help us for, however much work we had. And it just kind of grew. I think we have now about 10 or 12 employees, not a lot. Most of them are still part-time. We just have a couple full-time help. But yeah, so we had to just decide when it was time where we couldn't handle things anymore.
Great. Thank you. We have our first question from the audience. Susan is wanting to know from Professor Porter, is QuickBooks the preferred accounting software package? Are there others you would recommend? Is that your go-to? I know we've thrown out that company's name already. Is that your go-to? What would you tell the students?
Well, I would tell students that it is very, very popular and it's used quite a bit in the industry, especially for small businesses. And because it's used so much, that means that there's a lot of resources for you to learn it. And so most of the people that I know that are starting their own business will get some version of QuickBooks to help them. And QuickBooks has a lot of different ways that you can do it. They have, some very inexpensive ways where you can do things like QuickBooks Online. They have some more expensive ways where you can buy the full desktop version. But I recommend, if you want to use a software, QuickBooks is about the easiest I've seen for somebody who has little accounting knowledge. Now, you're going to be better at QuickBooks if you have accounting knowledge, but certainly there are people that I know that their knowledge is limited, but QuickBooks software is pretty straightforward and easy to learn. So I do recommend it and I teach it. There are other things out there, and there are ways that you can do it even through Excel or something like that. But just QuickBooks has a lot of things that are helpful for people who don't have a lot of knowledge and need something that's easy to use. So I recommend it if you want to use something.
And what's the difference between hiring a bookkeeper and hiring an accountant?
Well, the difference is that a bookkeeper is going to record transactions for you. Their expertise is basically in understanding the majority of how transactions are recorded. And when you hire an accountant, they're going to give you a broader look. The accountant is going to understand things like, what are the tax laws associated with it? Or what are the ways that it should be presented to your investors, or the way that it should be done for financial statement purposes? What is allowable? What is allowable under generally accepted accounting principles? Bookkeepers may not have the full source of knowledge there, but a typical accountant will have a lot more knowledge about the proper way to do your accounting. And typically, we will work with your bookkeeper to help your bookkeeper with questions they may have, or with things that they may have not known how to record. So, the accountant gives you the higher level look.
Okay, great. John talked about how he found part-time employees to come by and help them in the warehouse. Another student is asking us in the chat box, where can people find bookkeepers or accountants to help with their small business? Do any of you have ideas for our audience as far as if you're not right next to the high school and can't just put up a sign by your business, where can you go to identify people that can help you with these services?
Let me, if I may answer that question. There are resources out there. One that you just mentioned in my bio, Melissa, but there are small business development centers out there that are funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration, who have counselors who will help people at no cost. They have accountants on staff. They have bookkeeping. They've got all of these resources to help you get your business started. And so, there are resources out there. Sometimes you just have to look a little bit for them, but especially if your resources are limited, there are options out there with the small business development centers. There's also SCORE, Service Corps of Retired Executives. Again, another part of the U.S. Small Business Administration. So there are options out there. I'd also recommend, connecting with the chambers of commerce as well. They usually have a list of people as well who can help.
Okay, great. Anywhere else you can think of? Does anybody recommend LinkedIn?
There are some cases where LinkedIn will help. And Melissa, I do want to mention as well is that, people like us in our accounting departments deal with students who are actually moving into the profession. So, we've had a number of students and former students that are starting their own businesses, and they often let us know that they are doing that. I have a number of students that are going into starting their own bookkeeping business. Some are working for firms, but some of them want to do the sole proprietorship for themselves. And so, we're also a possible source for maybe finding somebody. Maybe one of your colleagues is already doing it.
And so on the topic of accounting, let's see, I think it's Jasper is asking, how much experience should you have before you think about opening your own accountancy firm?
Well, if you're going to open your own accountancy firm, you want to be at a minimum a certified public accountant. That is going to allow you to practice in the state of California. Now, there are other certifications you can have if you're going to be limited to, such as tax, where you can have the California certification under CTEC, or you can have an enrolled agent certification for the Internal Revenue Service. But for most cases, you need to have some sort of license in the state of California to practice. So that's where your starting point is.
Okay, great. As a follow-up, another student is asking, for anyone here on the panel, how do you know when it's time to transition from your full-time job to working on your new venture and making that your full-time job? Anybody have an idea? It's a tough question.
I'll chime in a little bit on that. Just from my personal experience, it is a really tough question. And I actually made the transition, and I'd say that it was a little earlier than I was ready. And the biggest thing that I found was, did I have enough resources to pay all of my bills? I mean, that really was the key for me. And what I found was that I didn't. So my first year, I really struggled. And, I was doing the whole thing of building clients, and, in our business, especially when you're building a service business, your business is built on word of mouth, and your business is built on how you can market yourself. Well, marketing requires some resources as well. So I had limited resources to market myself, and I had to rely on word of mouth. And so it was quite hard. So I always recommend that you do a little bit of analysis on, can you make ends meet? If you can make ends meet, maybe you're ready to move into the full-time sole proprietor or entrepreneurial business. But if you can't make ends meet, you may have to do a little bit more work before you step away from that job you may have.
That's good advice. Let's move on to another topic and talk about funding. Professor Chow, once an entrepreneur has spent through their savings or borrowed the maximum they can from mom and dad, where can they go for additional funding?
Well, that's a good question. My parents didn't have the money to lend me, right? So I couldn't max out on mom and dad very much. But that's a really good question. And that's something that I think goes back to that planning ahead, right? I think the professors on the panel mentioned about, kind of planning ahead. Professor Porter said he took a look at his resources. How much do I have, right? If he didn't have the resources, he kind of built that over time. And I think one of the things I would like to encourage students to do, and there was a talk about creating business plans earlier in the keynote speaker, a discussion or presentation. A business plan is important because that will let you know or tell you, as you plan out your business, when you'll need money as your business grows or scales. And the idea here is to plan for those early on, right? So a lot of that's planning ahead. And if I could, one of the things that is really important is that business plan. And at El Camino College, there's going to be a new venture development course that's coming up in the spring. I encourage students to look into that, because that course at the end of that course, it will help you put together a business plan, one that's actionable and one that you can use, right, to start your business, or at least reevaluate that and its viability as well. Because there was a question about, how do you know a business is viable? You do that by having that business plan. So I encourage you guys to take that course. especially those who are students or prospective students. It's a lot cheaper than paying a consultant. The professors here have your vested interest in mind, and they're not going to charge you a consulting fee, right? Essentially, the class is there, and we're all here to walk alongside you and help out, especially if you're taking a course like this, new venture development and the entrepreneurial courses. So planning ahead is one thing. To kind of get to some of the areas in terms of, fundraising or raising money, when I did it, and the couple times I did it, I knew at what stage I needed to raise money. And I knew that how much, I kind of had an idea of how much I needed to raise. Nothing goes according to plan, right? But you kind of adjust to it. So if I could raise enough money to get to the next stage of my business or kind of expand to a certain area or segment, I did it. If I didn't, oftentimes I'd have to go ahead and say, well, let's pivot and let's see another way we can get to our goal without that funding available. In each case, I started with my own money and I went as far as I could, but I always kept what we call that emergency cash. I don't know if you guys heard about that before. If you've taken a Business 17, personal finance, I had that emergency cash. Good thing I was single and young, so I didn't need a whole lot of cash, right? But when you get a little, you have a family or you get older, you have a lot of responsibilities and you have to think about that before you go into it. So some of the areas to look into, as Dr. Pham said, the Small Business Administration is a great place to go to. To learn about where funding sources might be. There are different institutions that can lend money as well at really good rates. Incubators are something to consider as well. There's a number of incubators here in the Southern California area. These are essentially companies or platforms where you could get a working space, you get advice from different business people. There'll be accountants there might be lawyers or people who have done things before. But these incubators, be careful because they will ask for a piece of your company, right? Nothing comes free, okay? Angel investors, individuals who invest money, there are angel investment groups out there as well. And obviously, venture fund or fund investors are out there as well. And that's where I usually, I got my seed money and the money that I used to expand my business. They were mostly angel investors and investment funds. One thing I do want to say though, is just be smart about who you bring in as your investor, because they, just like what was talked about earlier, it's kind of like a marriage, right? You're bringing on family members or members of your business when you bring on an investor, because investor is going to have a say in how you run your business at times, right? They're going to have an ownership in your business, so they're going to have a say. They're going to either contribute or detract from what you're doing. So there's a term that we use out there. The idea is to get smart money. Okay, well, what is smart money? Smart money is an investor where you're not just taking their money, but they may be able to give you advice because they've done it before. Okay, or they may have a customer base or give you leads because they were in the business and they can introduce you to new customers and help you expand the business. Or they may have other resources in addition to, let's say, the cash for the business. Maybe they have an adjacent business where they can give you something at really low rates, or they can help you expand in terms of infrastructure. So that's what we call smart money, money that can kind of help you along versus just the cash, right? And the last thing I would say about investors too, or raising money, we talk about pitching investors and putting a pitch deck and trying to convince them to invest money in us. Do the same thing, maybe not, do it in a very tactful way, but you need to interview them too. You need to know who you're getting involved with. Does the investor have the same goals in mind as you do? Are they planning to exit the business, which a lot of investors do? Okay, some angel investors, venture investors, they want to hold a business for maybe 5 years, 7 years. They're not planning to be your family member and kind of stay with you the whole time as you run your business for the next, say, 10, 15 years. They may want an exit, okay, meaning get out of the business, make their money and walk away. So you have to be aligned. Maybe they're gonna encourage you, sell the business, and you're thinking, no, I just got started. There's still the rest of the world to conquer, right? But they're looking for their return. So the whole point is that you need to be aligned with your investors, know what they can contribute, and get a sense of who they are as well. You don't want somebody else running your business. You're still, in a sense, you're still the person moving the business. You're still the entrepreneur. But some investors want to take too much control or have too much say, which is another reason not to take money from your parents. So you have to make sure that they're going to add or contribute to your particular business. So I would say those are some of the areas or places you can get money. At the same time, be smart about getting, if you can, smart money, but be smart about how you bring your investors in as well.
Some great advice. Thank you. So let's move to another topic. Some people will say it's the elephant in the room. Others will just call it COVID. Clearly, a lot of small businesses have closed this year. And so I'm wondering, how has the pandemic affected your small business? Professor Yossarian, you want to give that one a try?
Yeah, I'll take that. You know, it was really scary in the beginning when the shutdowns happened around March. So me and my partner, my brother, we sat there and talked because it felt like, you know, at LAX, when you see the planes landing or you've been in a plane, it screeched to a stop. That's what it felt like. The whole economy stopped. What was scary is that a lot of vendors that we had already shipped to that owed money, right? Accounts receivables. They're already saying that, hey, you guys, we cannot pay you at this point. So everything just kind of just stopped. But what happened is that as people started getting adapting to, look, this is the way things are going to be, we had to just figure out how can we adapt to this business. And so we actually started switching over and selling a lot of the protective gears, like the mask and the gloves and all that stuff, an area of business we had never touched before. So PPPs or protective equipment. I know, ironically, most recently, one of the biggest customers has been FEMA. So FEMA's been ordering all these masks from us. And sometimes I sit there and wonder, I go, is the government ordering to sustain the small businesses? Because I know they could go direct and get them cheaper, wholesale, but they're just, I think, buying from little places that are selling these masks just to sustain them. So we did adapt to that, and we had to change the project line. I don't know if you guys know the seller side of Amazon, but Amazon at some point in the beginning stopped allowing companies selling, let's say you're selling toys and gifts and stuff. They stopped those items and made all these protective gear priority. So if you were selling masks and all that stuff, they were shipping those out. But if you had other things that were just like, you know, video games and things like that, they were not sending those stuff up. They locked your account on that. So you had to, if you want to put some bread on your table, you got to survive. So you got to see what's happening and change what you're doing. But talking about that a little bit about the loans too, we did get an SBA loan, because SBA loan was very generous actually. They were giving out $100,000 less than 1% interest. You don't have to pay it back for like 5 or 10 years. There was some grants too, $10,000 here, $20,000 there. So we did take advantage of those kinds of grants. And we still have the SBA loan, which kind of allowed us to buy the equipment, the protective masks and all that, to sell to FEMA. So it's kind of a little ironic. It's like we're borrowing from SBA to buy these items at wholesale to sell back to the government at FEMA. So, there's sources of funding. I'm telling you, there's money everywhere. One other thing about money, we started in the beginning when we didn't have enough funding. We actually went to American Express. They actually offer business credit lines for like 0.05, like 0.5% interest. So $100,000, $50,000, we kind of actually tap that source instead of asking investors. So that's another option you guys can think about. But we had to set up a DUNS number. I don't know if you guys know that procedure. So you got to have a number that's associated. It's kind of like your business's social security number. It gives you what your credit line is worth. So you have to understand that part at some point in your career. That's all I got to add for that.
Thank you. Dr. Pham, did it affect your business at all?
Well, I sort of come from a different perspective. My law practice is based mostly with small businesses, and I also do estate planning. And estate planning includes drafting wills and trusts, documents that people prepare in advance just in case they pass away. And ironically, in a pandemic, most people were afraid of passing away when we started the whole COVID thing. So that part of my law practice has actually really taken off. I haven't really had to adjust much, but I've actually gotten a lot of calls from people who, really wanted to make sure their legal documents were all in place while all of this was happening. And so, ironically, it's probably done well for my business.
Moving forward into next year, what tips might any of you have, open to anybody, for people who are looking to launch and start their business in 2021 while we still have this pandemic ongoing?
If I can speak to that in a little bit, it's interesting, this pandemic, and I talk about disruption oftentimes when I talk to different entrepreneurs or just on the topic of new business development and where to take opportunity. I mean, disruption is a difficult thing, especially when it's a disruption like COVID. And in no way am I saying this is a good thing. I mean, this is it's terrible, and it's a pandemic that impacts all of us, and we've seen it, both in terms of people's health and loved ones. But at the same time, with that disruption comes opportunity, and I think that especially if you're a startup, if you're just starting a business, this is where the cracks in the system start opening up, and this is where you wedge yourself, I believe. And that's the same thing I did when I started my businesses. When I said I'm going to take the jump from my full-time job into starting my own business, the reason why I had to do it was because I felt that those cracks during disruptive times were starting to come together again. Other people were filling the gap. They were starting to take the opportunities I thought would be really interesting. So if you're thinking about starting a business in 2021, there's a ton of excuses not to, okay? But let me give you one kind of counter to that, or encouragement. If you see that there are cracks, opportunities where you can get yourself in there because of disruption, that could be your opportunity to look into starting a new venture, starting a new business. I invested in a company somewhat recently before COVID, and it's an apparel and accessories company online. It's purely an online native business. And once COVID hit, the panic was on. Everybody was thinking, okay, the business can go under. Sales was not huge. I mean, it's a $100 million revenue business, but at the same time, that can shrink very quickly. What actually happened was similar to Professor Syrian's example. That company had the best growth it's seen literally in the past 4 years, and it was owned by a very large institution before we acquired it. And the interesting thing about that was because it had its authenticity, it had its following way before COVID ever happened. It built its community, it knew its customers really well, it served their customers well. So when COVID came, that authenticity shined through. Its customers came back. The customers, and these are individual customers. These are the retail customers. These are not institutional customers. They were there for this particular company, but they were also there in that community. So I believe that when disruption happens, when difficult times happen, it's about how you adjust to that, but also looking for those disruptive cracks to take advantage of. Because if it was status quo and things are always the same, how are we going to get that opportunity as a startup, as somebody brand new, to be able to crack open, a segment of the market if it weren't for things like disruption?
Great points. Let's move on to another question for everybody in the group. Relative to your businesses, what comes to mind when you hear the phrase, you coulda, you woulda, or you should have done something, done this or that, opportunities that have passed that you wish you had taken advantage of? Are there regrets? Are there things that you would have done differently sitting here today after having learned what you know today?
I'll chime in a little bit on that. I was pretty young when I stepped into my own business, and I was trying to purchase business from another accountant who had a pretty large practice in Hollywood. And I had never been involved in any kind of purchase deal in my life. and I was learning on my own. And one of the things I did was I sought legal advice, and I thought that that was good. But I think that I did it the wrong way, in that I tried to go too aggressive to make everything favorable to me, and, instead of understanding that I needed to really work out the details, and not all of them are going to be favorable to me. I may have to get the deal, but, not with everything I wanted. And so what happened was I lost the deal because I tried so hard to make it completely, something that worked for me. And going, as I've learned after all these years, is that there's some give and take. And I might have been a lot better off if I had understood that I could live with certain things not being perfect, because ultimately it caused the whole deal to fall through. So, that's one of those things I would have, could have, should have.
That's the kind of story of my entrepreneurial career, partly too, the coulda, woulda, shoulda, or I told you so to myself, right? I want to echo something that Dr. Pham said. She said, make sure you know what your roles and your roles in the business are, and know that, like, before going in. And I think that's really, really good advice. Whether your partner is your BFF or somebody that can complement you, and it's a very professional relationship, that's all really good, because it can get really messy. Because when you're at a startup situation, you're rolling really quickly, you're doing everything you can and throwing yourself into the business. And then let me give you a good scenario. When good things happen, not just when tough times happen, do people get into arguments or things become contentious. Okay, don't just think because, if we're going to make it big and it's going to be awesome and we're not going to have any disagreements. Well, sometimes when you make it big and your valuations go up, that's sometimes the worst. Unfortunately, when big numbers come out, some of the worst things or thoughts from people can come out as well if you don't have everything documented or understood. And when I say some of the worst is, I mean greed. I mean, kind of things that are self-serving, or a false perception that I did more than you, right? So have those things discussed beforehand. A shareholders agreement is a great way to go. Also, you have to define how much you own of the business, how much the other person, how you make collective decisions. Let's say you come to an impasse, and both of you, or all three, or all four, depending on how many founders you have or decision makers, come to an impasse, and you don't. You're not making a single decision because no one agrees. How do you compromise? Who has a final vote? How do you come through those decisions? That's going to be important, not only saving the relationship, but also in terms of saving your business. I had a situation where within 6 months, and this is during one of the internet booms, I won't tell you which one, then you know how old I am as well. But during the early internet booms, the company went from literally 0 to 20 million in terms of valuation. Okay, that's when the trouble happened. Okay, I wish we never met that person, that entity that was trying to acquire a company, that media company, that said, hey, you're worth 20 million. Because once that person said that, it seeded the thoughts of, hey, how am I going to get more? Well, he didn't contribute that much. And I was saying, well, I have options to buy more shares, or I can invest more. What happened to that? And all that started coming in. And then if we had a clear agreement early on, I don't think any of that would have transpired the way it did. It still would have happened. People would still, a darker side or maybe a greedier side from certain partners would have come up still, but that would have been mitigated with some type of agreement, or at least we could point to something, versus then having to find lawyers each ourselves. And it turned out to be a pretty ugly situation. At the end of the day, everybody made out financially okay, but I have to be honest, it was one of the most distressful times I've ever had, and something that I'm not very happy about. And that was my first venture. So welcome to startups, right? But it's a tough lesson learned. So just wanted to share that.
And you also have talked about being humble, and that humility is important. And it seems like a challenge sometimes when you're looking at dollar signs. How do you maintain that humility?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've always known that there is always somebody bigger than you, okay, out there. There's somebody who is larger than you, knows more than you. But yeah, at the same time, And I say that in two ways. One, bigger than you in the sense of, they're larger companies, bigger competitors, but also I don't think we should always measure the value of who you are and others by the dollar sign. And I say that, and it sounds contradictory because we're talking about startups and making a ton of money, but yet at the same time, you're going to be an entrepreneur. You're going to have people put you down, basically, think your ideas, are worthless. Okay. Not fund you, give you a lot of excuses and say, oh, we can't help you and all this other stuff. You're going to be humbled, right? And if you value yourself by your dollar sign, okay, at those points, you might as well quit. Okay. So similarly, if you're doing well, you can't be valuing others with dollar signs as well. That should keep you humble. That should make you remember, hey, just as quickly as things that went really well, they can go terribly wrong as well. And I don't think, that's just my approach, right? And if you don't buy into this philosophy, I totally get it, right? Because I have a lot of friends that don't. They will take the dollar sign on, right? But for me, I mean, do you value yourself with dollar sign? And if you don't have that dollar sign on you, if you're not making that much money or you're not valued that highly, then do you look down on yourself? I mean, then you see yourself as less of a person or less of an entrepreneur, less of a leader, less of somebody who tries to make a difference with the mission that you have in your business or your organization, right? So I think that's where that humility comes along, right? Having gone through difficult times is a real humbler.
Anybody else have a thought on humility, whether it's with your own small business or just with your professional success and doing well for yourselves, how to maintain that humility?
Honestly, Professor Porter is going to speak. Honestly, I think like what happens is that, I'll kind of touch on that while I'm giving a bigger picture scenario. In the beginning of the business, you're focused on like the numbers. So you're like, oh, I want to hit 500,000. I want to hit $1 million. I think it comes to a point where it's like, in the long term, if you're going to survive, it's not just about the numbers game anymore. It's about the success of your business as a whole. So we've kind of like stopped looking at the numbers. Obviously, that's important, but we don't look at it as frequently as we used to. So when it was like, let's see every day how much money we made, it's like, let's look at it every quarter. But and I do want to touch on that a little bit. We've had to make adjustments because when you're looking at your own numbers, you may see one thing, but when we took it to an accountant, they looked at it a different way. They looked at our numbers and said, you know what? You made $1 million, but your profit margin was too narrow for the industry you're in. So it's good to like, have a second look at your numbers, but you got to be humble because, you got to still be open for other people's opinion. And the big picture thing is, do you want your business to succeed or are you just looking at dollar signs? Because if you're looking just at dollar signs and you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're going to fail quickly. You're going to be tired of that business and you want to get out. So you have to enjoy it. That's my thought on that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Or shall we move on?
I'll just make one comment here is that, we all learn humility in one way or another. And some of us learned the hard way, which, that was my way. But one of the things that I learned, from very young and coming out and working with a lot of people in different areas of business is that you really need to respect people who have been doing what they do for a long time. And, you can come out thinking that you've got a great college degree and that, you're now a certified public accountant or whatever. But a lot of times you'll find that the people that you are working with have a great deal of knowledge and experience in so many different areas. And I learned the hard way by criticizing a bank president for an investment he made. Yeah, that wasn't a good idea. It turns out that it really was a bad investment, but it was, but it was, who is this young whippersnapper that's going to question my investment knowledge and my investment abilities? And, and my question really was, why did you make that investment? But what I learned was that just sometimes listening is better than expressing an opinion. And, you know, you can be humble in just that way, which is respecting that that was the choice the person made. So, you know, sometimes you have to learn the hard way, but it is really good to take in consideration all the things that everybody in different organizations bring to the table, because you'll find that there's a wealth of knowledge everywhere that you won't have. So that's my little tidbit.
Good point. I like it.
Melissa, sorry. Just
Sure.
to piggyback onto what Professor Porter said, you know, you really want to sort of get your advice from your knowledge base around you, from your sort of informal advisory board around you. But also you want to surround yourself with people who will be honest with you and tell you the truth. You know, if you surround yourself with just yes people all day long, that humbleness is going to go away really quickly. And so you want to make sure that you surround yourself with people who can be honest with you, but also supportive. So it's sort of that delicate balance.
Good point. We've received a few questions from our audience, and one goes back to the finance area, and they're asking about crowdsourcing. Anybody with an opinion about using crowdsourcing as a source for fundraising?
I haven't done any crowdsourcing myself, although I have had you know, close associates who have used crowdfunding, in particular Indiegogo, and I think one other one too. But what they did was that it wasn't that just that they needed the money. They actually decided to go with crowdfunding because it gave them a platform to advertise or kind of market their product as well. That's the decision that was the decision that kind of they took, rather than kind of raising private money or angel money. So they had angel money. They wanted to raise $450,000, and they had people who would invest in them, right? Angel investors. And when I say angel investors, I'm sorry if I didn't define that term. Those are individuals who have money to invest in a business, and oftentimes were entrepreneurs themselves or have something to offer, right? So it's kind of like an angel that helps you along. They're an angel investor. So they had angel investors. They had individuals who would give them money, but they chose crowdfunding, and that helped them a lot. They raised more than the 450, and they got their brand out. They got awareness out, and there was a lot of buzz going around in social media based on that crowdfunding. So I think that would be an interesting avenue, but just make sure that your product, whatever you're selling, fits into that crowdsourcing platform. Make sure it's things that people are interested in buying. It's either a product, a good that you're going to be delivering on time, that people will talk about. There'll be buzz around it, because it can also hurt you. Let's say you're launching a crowdfunding campaign, and your product comes out and it's terrible, right? People don't like it. I mean, you're going to hear about it from all the people who put money into it, right? So make sure you create enough buzz around that and enough support in terms of online marketing to support that crowdfunding effort. And it's more than just about the money when it's crowdfunding. It's about that marketing aspect too.
Good point. Another student is asking a question, and this might be appropriate for Dr. Pham, about starting your business as a nonprofit versus a traditional partnership or sole proprietorship.
Yeah,
what can you tell students about starting it as a nonprofit?
It really depends on what the focus of the business really is. I mean, I think I need to know a little bit more about the context of the question regarding, you know, what specific type of nonprofit, but obviously there are organizational issues to be thought of when you are setting up a nonprofit. You have to make sure accounting wise it's set up properly. And so there are a lot of issues that go along with specifically nonprofit agencies. And there are attorneys that specialize in setting up nonprofit businesses. It's sort of a special niche area on its own. So,
okay, and if that student has a more detailed question, pop that in the chat box and we can come back to it. For the group, what would you tell a budding entrepreneur who hasn't taken the first step yet, but they have an idea that has been percolating through their mind for quite some time? They might find themselves with some extra time on their hands after the semester's done, until spring starts, or just because under the COVID environment, a lot of people are home and not commuting and have a little spare time. For those people out in our audience that are thinking about starting a venture, what advice, what would you tell them? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I mean, I'll kind of talk on that. I think the first thing is a lot of people that I talk to that are starting business say, hey, I want to, let's say, design a product. This is what I'm going to make. But a lot of times they don't think about where it's going to end up, like the big picture. So you have to really think things through. So you're like, okay, I'm making this. How am I going to market it? Where do I want it? Do I want it in retail stores? Do I want it to be online shopping or Amazon stuff? You got to figure that out. So I think that having again, like a business plan kind of will help you a little bit with that. So there's something I wanted to save a little while ago. I think it's a good opportunity for people to take classes here at El Camino. Like I wish I could have went back and taken a QuickBooks class because I'd have been better at my accounting when I started the business. So you have an opportunity here right now if you have a lot of free times on your hand, especially with Zoom, these classes, you don't have to go anywhere. You could be at home. So like try to learn as much as you can while developing your business at the same time. So, but you have to if you have something percolating in your head, you should start like a trial run. That's what I would say. So instead of, making this ordering 10,000 units of whatever, order maybe 20 units if you're trying to get into like wholesale B2B business and see how that does. Experiment with that, take that first step because a lot of people don't do that first step and they sit there thinking. So there's this example I use in class. There's the thinker and there's a doer. So the doer, there's a statue I have where the doer is missing because they're off doing that thing. And then thinker's still sitting there thinking about it. So you can think forever, but you got to just take some steps, use this opportunity, with your home, with COVID and everything.
Anybody else that can address those that are out there thinking about this, but haven't started doing it yet?
The only thing I would add to that is just to make sure that, one, it is your passion, especially if you're going into a service type business, that you really have not only the expertise in it, but you love doing it. I can't tell you how much it is different when you work with somebody who really loves what they do. If it's a product that you love, then that's great. If it's the work that you love, that's great, because you're going to be even better at it if you love it. And the other thing is just know that, as you're gearing into it, it's maybe a good thing to start is understanding how much work it takes. So, it might be a good time to start your research and start putting together your business plan and start all that before stuff, which is the planning part, because I always tell people in my organizations and the clients that I work with is that your plan is really going to be the key to your success. And I always like, even in accounting where we're just doing a job, you have a better result when you've planned it so much better. So yeah, as Professor has said, that use this time now to kind of research your business and, kind of do some testing.
Can I chime in with one real quick thing? I just want to jump off of what both Professor Porter and Professor Yasarian said. There's never a perfect time, right? And if you're always thinking, you could plan and make sure you have good plans, but if you're always just thinking and planning, I mean, it'll never happen because you have that perplexity of, I have come up with a new idea, or hey, maybe this can happen too. I'll give you two student examples. Okay, so I have a lot of students from El Camino who have a great idea for an urban fashion brand, okay, or apparel brand, okay, and there's some creative people out there, and everybody thinks, hey, I'm going to be the next Supreme. I'm going to do a drop every Thursday, maybe not Thursday because Supreme drops on Thursday, but I'm going to do a drop on Wednesday, and I'm going to sell it out. I'm going to sell my company for $2.1 billion to VF Group like Supreme did, right? And it's all great. I tell you, I've met one student though who actually started it. Okay, I've met like a dozen. I'm not joking here, and I think they're super creative. I met one student who actually started it. He wasn't the best artist. He wasn't the best. He was not even in the fashion area. He's an accounting student. Okay, not putting down accounting students. They're creative too. Okay, Dr. Porter. But the point though is that he actually did it, and the way he did it was that he came up with 3 designs and he tested the market out, just like Professor Yossarian said. And I wanted to point that out. You don't have to start with, I need $1 million to start. Like, no, you could start with what you have, maybe a savings, or you work an extra few hours at the job, and you start that off, and you get that A/B testing going on. I mean, what I mean by that is you test out your product, see if it works, see if it doesn't. And in fact, there's an entrepreneur I spoke with last week, which is kind of, talking about his business. He has a $20 million business. He's 27 years old. It's all on Instagram. And all he does, Instagram and TikTok, okay? All he does is put up designs, see what people like, and he starts selling it. And he always sells out within 4 hours, okay? It's not a huge company, but he's doing pretty well with that. And it's just like a drop. He drops it and he does it. But what did he do? He started when he was in college at a very small budget, and he's still doing the same thing. But you have the luxury. And I think most students out there, especially if you're using social media, because if you're on Instagram all day long, okay, you might as well make it work for you, okay? So get on and test that out. Test your products out, okay? See if that works, see if it will sell, get feedback. That's a perfect way to do it, okay? And then you could look at everybody's TikTok and their dance and then their move thing as well. But, use that for your business. Take your domain knowledge, okay, and make it work for you. You have capabilities, okay? Think about where that can come in and help you sell. This is a case for the fashion brands, but I tell you, that one student, he took that leap and he's growing that business. Others are still thinking about it, and they're still emailing me, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And I'm happy to speak to them, but yet at the same time, I wish I could just direct them to this one classmate who actually went out and did it, right? And he wants to get a CPA as well. So, yeah.
Excellent. Professor Chow, you talked a little bit about exiting companies. And I think exit strategies are not always what somebody who's starting at the very beginning, starting their business is thinking about. They're thinking about the here and now and not always what the big picture is and what is in the plans. I think Professor Yossarian talked a little bit about the big picture look. But for Professor Chow, at what point did you know it was time to sell your business? Can you give us 1 or 2 examples of what the exit strategy looks like?
Yeah, there's two examples I'll give. The first one was I sold the business because I felt that I couldn't take it to the next level on my own. The acquirer would fulfill the mission I had for this particular company, for this particular business. I wanted to impact a certain area of finance. It was a kind of a strategy that we had going in. It was a business model that I thought was really good, and we got validation from that with customers, but we didn't have the resources to take it to a larger level and in a larger context as well. And so the acquirer, the person acquiring, basically could do that and had the resources to do it and do it much faster. So I felt there was a opportune time for that business model to be effective. And this company that wanted to acquire us, this other financial institution that wanted to acquire us, could do that. And so that's when I decided, it is a time to sell, because the vision that we had as founders could be realized much faster and much, honestly speaking, much better by another institution that had the resources and the wherewithal. Whereas we probably could have done it too, but may have taken us longer. They may have said, well, if you don't want to sell to us, we're going to do it ourselves and eat your lunch for you. So that was pretty convincing as well as a possible thought strategically. But really fulfilling that mission and seeing that come to fruition. And you could keep an equity stake, or you could keep an ownership stake, even though somebody buys you out. I've always planned my businesses with a potential exit in mind, because my investors required that of me. They said, look, we're institutional investors. We look to get our money back at a certain time. How will you exit your business? And you may have investors that will ask the same thing. So you have to think about that early on in your planning. The second one was a personal situation. And personal situations come to play. We have family situations, and for me, it was a family matter. And I had to weigh my priorities at that stage. And that's what I did. And so, at that stage, I decided to exit that particular business. I'm grateful the business was doing pretty well. So the exit was not, it was tough, emotionally. It was tough in terms of letting go, but at the same time, it wasn't a loss type of situation in that sense, or at least it was somewhat even.
Yeah, good information. Thank you. So another student is asking more about e-commerce. So this is for Professor Yossarian. E-commerce, what tools would you recommend students look into? They specifically mentioned Shopify. I think people think about Amazon, but I know you're more in the business to business space. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into e-commerce and how you're making it happen?
Yeah, so Shopify is one of the channels we also use. There's so many different sites out there. Our philosophy is that you can't just say, I'm going to only be on Amazon. You have to be on every platform that you can get access to. So we actually, the funny story is, we were anti-Amazon in the beginning for a number of years. I think the first 4 years of business, we're like, we're not getting on Amazon. We're staying off of that. So we were on different sites, Groupon. There's other tech sites, Shopify, like the small mom and pop ones. And then what happened is one of our vendors was like, you're making a big mistake. You're not on Amazon. Your potential is not maximized. And we're like, you know what? Let's just try one item. And we saw the impact that it did, because the Amazon's power to like reach the United States, even globally, you got millions of people sitting there. And so what it did is we tried a few items. Well, actually one in the beginning, and it just like our sales went out the roof. So we're like, as much as we didn't want to be on Amazon, you can't avoid it. So Shopify, Groupon, try to get into as many sites as you can be. And this is another thing that I quickly learned though in business. A lot of the vendors that we were buying from, they would always ask us the question, is this product going to end up on Amazon? And so you're like, why do you ask that? So there's a lot of vendors that will sell you items that they don't want being ended up on Amazon. They're like, specifically, please do not sell this. We don't want it there, because you gotta. They want the price to be held at a point. We had other vendors tell us, hey, I don't want it to be on Amazon because I'm selling it myself on Amazon. And if you come in at a lower price, you're competing, cannibalizing off my sales. So they're like, sell it anywhere else you want. Just don't sell it there. But as a small business, like if you're trying to start something at home, where we started, honestly, was experimenting with eBay. eBay is still a great platform for the small entrepreneur. Start there. And then I think Amazon is more like, I would say, the big boys market, because it's very cutthroat. So you need to understand a lot of things. There's algorithms and all this. We didn't understand that going in, but there's a lot of algorithms, reviews, and how that plays into your position on where your product ends up when someone's Googling scarves. So there may be a million ones, but there's algorithms that push your stuff up. There's software actually that also adjusts the prices for you. It's very complicated. It's crazy, but so start on something small and then grow out of that.
Thank you. So I think some of you have talked a little bit about baby steps. Is it possible to test the market with baby steps to make sure your product is well received? And I think the answer some of you have already given is yes, it's possible, and it's probably suggested. But how do you do this? How do you take those baby steps and break it down into small, digestible pieces and not try to take on the world?
If I can talk about it from a legal perspective, I sort of mentioned it earlier, but one of the baby steps that you can take from a legal perspective is just to start off as a sole proprietor or as a general partnership. And then as you work and you grow revenues and you've got some money to set aside for formal legal advice, and you have more assets to protect, because, during startup stage, if you're fresh out of college, if you're still in college and you don't have a ton of assets to protect right now anyway, it may be okay to take a little bit of a riskier route and just start off as a solo or general partnership. And then as you work to build up your revenues, you see that it's more of a real possibility in terms of a sustaining business. That's when you start to take more of the formal steps. So you can sort of ramp up from that stage as well from a legal perspective.
Thank you. Anybody else with baby steps or go big?
I think there's a somebody had a question who was an interior designer and talking about whether they should go ahead and do something on their own, start their own business. One of the things that I did, I wasn't in interior design, but in terms of providing services in one of my businesses was that I took on a small client first, and that client was very forgiving in terms of how I dealt with them and worked with them. And that client gave me good advice. I didn't charge that client a whole lot because I was like, they were like kind of a test case. I think you guys have heard of, different software companies kind of launching their first, 1.0 type of version, and you kind of improve on it as you get more experience or as more users come on. The same idea here, if you want to test out something, you may want to, for that particular person who asked the question about the design business, maybe you could take on one client first, see how your project management skills are, see where you're deficient, see where you're really good at, and then you can think about, wow, would I want to do this on my own full-time? Would I be able to get new customers and more customers as I'm doing this business as well, or kind of executing on the operations as well? That could give you a good start. So you might want to start with that one client or a few clients, kind of at your beta testers almost, right? When you're doing that, and see if you're up for that challenge or what deficiencies you might have, and you might learn a lot as well.
And Dr. Pham, can you tell us a little bit about how you started off with your law practice and what steps you took to develop it?
For me, I had sort of an existing clientele from when I worked at the law firm. And, honestly, in estate planning, it's really, I went after my friends and family first. So went after my extended family, all the aunts and uncles, everybody who I knew who, had assets to protect. So I knew that I sort of had a built-in sort of clientele already. And then from there, just slowly built my business by networking. It was a slow process, but I also had another full-time job, which I still do. So it was easy for me to transition that way to balance out.
Thank you. And some students have been asking about the courses relevant to our topic today. So I'll tell you that there's 2 classes that you could consider if that's one of the questions you were thinking about. The new class that we've referred to a little bit in the last 2 hours is called New Venture Creation, Business 36. It's going to be offered in the spring semester. Our spring semester starts in mid-February. Registration for that will open in a week or 2. I think you'll find registration open right after the Thanksgiving holiday. And you can look for that. The other class is entrepreneurship, small business development, entrepreneurship, and that's Business 24. They're a little bit different. The New Venture Creation is only 2 units, rather Business 24 is 3 units. New Venture Creation, the idea is to bring your small business idea to the table, and you will spend the 16-week semester developing your business plan. And the other course, Business 24, is more of a soup to nuts course that overviews all aspects, some of which we've talked about here today, and developing ideas and your business venture. So those are 2 that you might think about. There is also now an entrepreneurial program, which is a 2-year degree or a certificate of achievement. And if you want more information about either course or that degree or certificate, you can email us at entrepreneurship@elcamino.edu. And you can reach us that way or reach out to any of us individually. All of our email and contact information is available on the Business Division website of the college. So to wrap up, I have one more question for each of you in 30 seconds, plus or minus. What final bit of advice would you give to the audience as a takeaway for today. What important information or advice would you offer our students and our community members in the audience today? Let's start with Professor Porter. What do you think?
Well, I first want to make sure that everyone knows that it's doable in just about every field, and you can be successful in anything you want. My advice to you is always stick with what you know and always stick with your passion. And I think that you'll do so well that way. So many of you are going into, you mentioned accounting or you mentioned products. And again, I always say, if it is something that you are really behind, you can find a way to make it successful.
All right. Who else would like to offer a few bits of advice?
I'll chime in. So I took some notes about this. First of all, you're going to get a lot of people telling you you can't do something. So if you have an idea or a business plan, it's surprising. 9 out of 10 will tell you that's not a good idea. How are you going to do that? So don't listen to the naysayers. Do what you like to do. There's a good reference in that movie I like to point out in Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, where he turns to this little boy and he says, "Don't ever let anyone tell you you can't do something. They're just trying to take your dreams away." So it's I think it's something I hold dear to, because no matter what you do, like my students even ask me this, if I get into real estate, there's too much competition. I said, if you go get a 9-to-5 job, there is competition there too. You're applying with 1,000 people sending in an application. So if you like something, pursue it. You have to enjoy what you're doing, because if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to stay in that business. And being an entrepreneur doesn't mean you're going to have every 10 hours a day free to do what you want. It's actually working longer than 8 hours. So I got to say, you're always working 7 days a week, 24/7. You're always working. So you got to be ready to put in those hours. And I think that, right now during COVID, there's a saying I've been hearing, which I like, is that, if you haven't started something now, it's not because, you lack the time. It's because you lack the discipline, because you've had all this time at home. You didn't have to drive to campus, do other things. I tell my students that, the people that are going to succeed once COVID is over are the ones that are doing things now. So taking classes now, improving themselves now, learning new skills now. So take that opportunity, and just pursue your passion. That's my little closing thoughts.
Thank you. How about Dr. Pham?
My little tidbit is, don't be intimidated to ask for help, especially from professional help from your lawyers and accountants and your business advisors. Not every attorney works in a high-rise building at $600 an hour. There's somebody for you at every stage of your business. And so that's my little tidbit, is ask for advice and don't be intimidated.
Good point. Good advice.
Yeah, I guess I should chime in as well. But I really think the panel here has really touched on all the major points. I think the last thing I would say is, that the idea of getting up when you're knocked down, and you can be knocked down by different things, clients, customers, the lack of thereof, right? Clients and customers. But that idea of getting up and continuing on, I think that resilience, that kind of tenacity, build that into kind of how you're going to operate your business and how you do things as well. Because as Professor Yossarian said, there are people who say that, oh, that's a nutty idea, or that's never going to work, or it's never the right time. But I mean, you've got to be the judge of that. But you have to be the judge of that judiciously, in the sense of knowing what advice to take, when to pivot maybe the business, when to continue on and push forward. But I think try to take away that fear of failure. I think a lot of us have that, and myself included. I'm not different in any way, but by taking that away, by pushing that down through hard work, through better, improving your ideas or finding good advice from people. I mean, that's where it's going to be at. That's where you're going to be able to push away those fears by actually taking action, because the fear will consume you if you just sit there. Okay, but if you're actually taking action against it, you're building your business. You know, you can put a lot of that aside. You're still going to risk, but yet at the same time, I really believe in that, you know, tenacity of when you get knocked down, get right back up.
Well said from all four of you. And thank you so much for your time today. You've provided so much insight for our audience, our students, and our community. And your time is precious, and I understand that. And I really appreciate your partnership in joining us today. Thank you to all four of our panelists. Well done. And I'd like the audience to know that on Thursday, this dialogue continues. Please use the same Zoom link that you used today to meet us here. And the lineup includes entrepreneurs in the fields of human resources and a motivational speaker that is a content creator, as well as a representative from LinkedIn who will speak about the importance of your social media presence for your small business. So I wish you a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today, and good luck to all of you with your business ideas. Have a great day.